In 1920, the battleship was still the power of the fleet. Studies of the trajectories of incoming shells had given her armored decks, and the invention of the torpedo and submarine had given her a belt of armor around her waterline. If, as the enthusiasts of aviation asserted, the aeroplane was a real threat, then obviously the versatile battleship would adapt to nullify that threat. The carrier was really only a side issue. The main debate was between the proponents of plane and battleship. One area where the two sides agreed was that there was a need to assess the situation practically, rather than in endless hostile theorizing. And so, in 1921, while the Langley was still under reconstruction, a series of trials were conducted to sink warships from the air.
The Navy had long wanted to carry out bombing tests against naval vessels, but was hampered because of a lack of adequate targets. Fortunately, at the end of the First World War, when Germany surrendered its ships, they were apportioned among the Allied naval powers. When the ships arrived, it formed a naval task force composed of Navy aircraft and Marine planes, and I was put in charge. The Navy invited the Army to take part in the test, feeling that we all had a lot to learn about bombing ships and that all of our pilots should get experience in that work. The plan called for bombing one ship of each type: submarine, destroyer, cruiser, and battleship. And to attack all the ships, first with small bombs and then work up gradually to bigger and bigger bombs. To inspect the ships after each attack and to have the Navy, Army, and Marine Corps planes alternate in the attacks. The big event, of course, was the bombing of the battleship Ostfriesland.
The Ostfriesland, of 22,000 tons, was still a fairly modern ship. Built in 1911, before the days of air attack, she was, nonetheless, constructed to withstand heavy bombardment, and the Germans had a well-deserved reputation for the quality of their armor, so she was seen as a serious test of the aeroplane's power. Waves of aircraft bombed her over a day and a half. She was hit repeatedly and extensively damaged, but remained seaworthy. Though she was a stationary target, few of the bombs dropped actually hit her, and she suffered major damage only when she was struck by a 2,000-pound bomb, the biggest available. Even then, she took hours to sink. Had she been given reasonable damage control and fire parties, she would have stayed afloat.
Next morning, the newspapers carried big accounts of the whole thing and created the impression throughout the country that aviation had made navies obsolete.
Though the aviation enthusiasts claimed a clear victory, fairer assessments were not so clear-cut. If the battleship had to adapt, then equally, the aeroplane still had a long way to go. Tests continued throughout the interwar years, seeing a series of old US battleships meeting the same messy and undignified scuttling. Meanwhile, within the Navy, aviation had secured some effective and forceful advocates, including the Chief of the Navy's Bureau of Aeronautics, Admiral William A. Moffett.
Admiral Moffett has generally been called the father of naval aviation, and I think very properly so, because he is probably responsible more than any other one man for our having a single Navy, a single weapon system, making use of aviation as an integral part of the Navy, if not its main striking power. That was Admiral Moffett's accomplishment. He was a very attractive, forceful, and energetic man with a tremendous power of persuasion. And being a very brainy man, he tied in persuasion with logic. So he was able to put his ideas across both to the public and to the Navy itself.
Admiral Moffett died in the crash of one of the Navy's airships, but he'd overseen the Navy's thinking on aviation well, and his work in establishing an effective structure for naval aviation, staffed by dedicated and like-minded officers, meant that not only did he leave a clear course for development, but the men to see it followed. Naval aviation encompassed three major areas of operation. There were numerous patrol aircraft. These were large, long-range flying boats or ship-based seaplanes, charged with control of the sea lanes, reconnaissance, and active submarine attack, normally operating independently. Though effective at their jobs, they were not to be expected to dogfight their way in hostile airspace, being agonizingly slow and hard to defend. Even slower were the Navy's giant rigid airships, the ultimate in airborne observation platforms and capable of huge lifting, theoretically a highly effective anti-sub patrol or convoy escort. With ship-based mooring mast, the airships could travel with and aid the fleet, but history was to overtake them before the next war. The Navy also had numerous other smaller non-rigids, which performed their jobs very well, but a lot of glamour was invested in the airships, as well as a large amount of the scarce funds for naval aviation. Until 1927, the sole representative of the Navy's third air arm, carriers, was the little Langley. Though she was small, she saw the Navy's future leaders pass, and their experience in making a workable aerodrome out of her pocket handkerchief flight deck was to be the long-serving basis of carrier practice. Those who flew with the Langley retained a certain distinction within the Navy for many years. However, despite the Langley's small deck, and even with the limited pilot training of the day, the difficulty of working from the ship was more apparent than real. The planes themselves were so slow, stable and controllable that operations were more reliant upon nerve and skill than on luck.
The qualification consisted of 3 successful landings and takeoffs. And once you'd made 3 of them, you were a carrier pilot. And of course, we built this thing up. Those of us who were carrier pilots, we affected to look down our nose at all other aviators because we were Langley pilots. And we built this all up to be quite a thing. And then later, when we got the other carriers, and it was our job to train and classify other carriers, then we had to break it all down again and convince everybody it was easy and safe and nothing to it. But that Langley was really something.
Various configurations and ideas were tried out in the quest for the most effective way of landing planes safely onto the narrow deck. This experimentation, of course, also included study of the aircraft and their ability to withstand the stresses of the often direct and severe shipboard landings. Transverse arrestor wires and fore and aft wires to prevent the plane from slewing over the side were used on the Langley individually and in combination. As part of the process of operational evolution, the arrestor hook, symbolic of the carrier aircraft, was developed and refined.
One of my jobs was to design the hook, the trailing hook that engaged the wires that would attach the airplane. We had a very vague idea of what the stresses actually were on the airplane, if they were important to have in order to design the hook and its attachments, and also to know the distribution of the weights in the hole. So I borrowed from the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics an accelerometer. It was the only one in existence. It was their pride and joy. And I faithfully promised that I'd take good care of it. The film that made the record, the accelerometer, was only good for 30 seconds. So it had to be turned on just as the airplane was coming over the ramp and the pilot was concentrating on making a precision landing. Well, I got in this VE-7 and circled around and came in for my landing. Just as I came over the ramp, I put my head in the cockpit to turn the switch on. Well, I must have unconsciously pushed the stick forward, because when I put my head out of that cockpit, that deck was coming up here 100 miles an hour. I was too low and too fast. I pulled back, but it was too late. My hook engaged the cross wire, but my axle hook didn't engage the 4.5 wire. I had the dubious distinction of being the first man to go overboard on any of our aircraft carriers. It was the most embarrassing incident that I remember in my whole career, because I designed the hook that broke. I was flying the airplane that broke the hook, and I crashed an airplane, and I lost the NACA's accelerometer.
Admiral Pennoyer may have been the first to go over the side, but naval aviators were to discover many ways of getting into trouble during carrier operations and reward naval film crews with some prize crash footage. Future Admiral Gerald Bergan was one of the pilots filmed in the act of crashing during a landing on the Langley.
My tail hook, as it sometimes would happen, instead of engaging the arresting wire, rode one of these fore and aft wires, which caused the plane to slew to the left. There were several people, including Commodore Reeves, standing in the gallery near the two smokestacks on the port side, and I was afraid that my propeller would chew them up. So against all regulations, I gave her full throttle, and I did a very beautiful wing.
Flying the airplanes on or off the carrier deck seemed quite an experience to us in those days, partly because of the rather low-power Hispano-Suizer engine and wooden propeller with which the airplane was equipped, and partly because of the configuration of the airplane itself. I remember we had to put 2 or 3 cushions into the cockpit seat in order to sit high enough to see over the rather sizable radiator, which the liquid-cooled engine installation required. Also, the engine was rather sensitive to temperature changes, and whenever you varied the throttle up or down, you had also to vary the radiator shutters, which were manually operated. You felt a little like an organ player as you came in for a landing perched up on those cushions. One hand on the control column and one hand playing a tune, first on the throttle and then on the radiator shutters, then on the hook release, and then back to the throttle and other odds and ends, so that all this time while you are making an approach with your wheels only a few feet above the water. What the Navy needed for this situation was a whole new deal in airplane engine design, something which would make full use of the opportunities which the aircraft carrier offered, and yet be capable of the short takeoffs and landings required, and rugged enough to stand the beating of day-by-day operations into the arresting gear and by catapult shot. A new type power plant was also a key element in this program.
The development of the air-cooled radial engine was to revolutionize naval aviation, cutting weight, troublesome maintenance, and storage problems. Their weight savings made the use of catapults redundant until the post-war appearance of jet-powered planes. However, in the 1920s, the major problems for the Navy were not concerned with carrier aviation. A combination of naval treaties and funding constraints was suffocating the service. The Washington Naval Conference Accords of 1922 were designed to head off the ominous and cripplingly expensive battleship building competition developing among the major naval powers, and strict limits on building were agreed to. However, because the previous frenzy of construction meant that there were half-completed ships on all the nations, compared to the Langley, the two ships were huge. They could carry and service up to 80 aeroplanes. Though there were flaws in their design, like the 8-inch gun turrets, the Lexington and Saratoga were fast, effective carriers, with huge capability in defense and attack, and America was to be very glad of their services in the dark months after Pearl Harbor. By this time, the Navy had fully accepted the role of aeroplanes in the fleet, a point underlined by the Secretary of the Navy. The aerial complement of the ships broke up into fighters, bombers, and torpedo planes. In addition, a couple of seaplane patrol aircraft were carried, which could be lifted out onto the water by crane or catapulted from the deck. But in the longer term, they became irrelevant. The carrier crews had their attention focused on the flat top's potential to act as an attack weapon. What the air crews practiced and thought about was offensive action. To better use their bombs, they invented the dive bombing technique, which was to be their most successful attack method. The result of the effort and experimentation of the carrier crews and their airmen was a working system. Through experimentation and refinement, the process of development was to continue unabated. But after the Langley, the two big new carriers started life as very effective machines from the first time they flew their aircraft aboard. In part, this was an accident of their birth as battlecruisers. The Navy was to show a leaning towards smaller ships, and Lexington and Saratoga were to remain the largest carriers up until the post-war Midway class. They had been built to the virtually unchanged cruiser hulls, with a massive hangar, 450 feet long, 70 feet wide, installed on top. There was a further maintenance shop, and below was a hold for storing spare aircraft. This gave a massive firepower through the big ship's many planes. To spare the fleet from having to follow the carrier's antics as she prowled round the wind to fly her planes off, she and her defensive screen and support ships were made into a separate unit. However, rather than having the forlorn look of an urchin set aside from the center of activity, the arrangement immediately suggested an active intent, an attacking formation. The carrier task force had been born. Where the Navy had obtained only 3 aircraft carriers, none of which had been originally laid down as such, it had dozens of types of aircraft. Most of these were designed specifically for operating in the harsh shipboard environment. The majority of types tested and used were in circulation for only a short time. Small orders and high attrition through crashes and mechanical failure over the sea saw the types rotated into and out of service regularly. Some manufacturers chose to specialize in the construction of Navy planes, and their designers became expert in the special considerations of carriers. The small production runs hampered the rapid growth of these firms, but they were, with bankruptcies and collapse widespread in aviation, happy to still be in business, and happier still to continue refinement of their design ideas. Steadily, the Navy's aircraft improved, and the carrier men delighted in the responsiveness and agility of their biplanes as they went about the serious business of practicing combat and attack tactics.
In those days, it wasn't, as I say, we were, to some degree, kind of pampered pets, prima donnas. We were developing dive bombing techniques. We were developing formation and tactical technique. We had a pretty free hand. Was it established fleet aviation as a real combat arm of the fleet? And I never had so much fun in my life.
Aviation, the art of aeronautics, began with the dreamers, inventors, and daredevils who dared to defy gravity. The journey of aviation was nurtured by pioneers like the Wright brothers, whose first flight marked a historic milestone. The role of aircrafts in world wars was groundbreaking, dramatically changing warfare strategies. This initiated a technological evolution in aviation, transforming the simplistic wings of a biplane into the thunderous roar of jet engines. Let's journey through the ages of aviation. Behind every great aircraft, there were great minds. These visionaries, like Sir Frank Whittle, the innovator of the turbojet engine, redefined air travel. Then there's Skunkworks' Kelly Johnson, the genius behind the SR-71 Blackbird. His designs combined speed, stealth and power, crafting machines that dominated the heavens. The contributions of these pioneers have left an indelible mark on the canvas of aviation, shaping the course of history and inspiring generations of engineers and aviators. Each epoch in aviation history gave birth to extraordinary aircrafts, each with their own unique features and roles. The Lockheed SR-71 Blackbird was a marvel of speed and stealth. The F-105 Thunderchief, a supersonic fighter bomber, was vital in the Vietnam War. The P-51 Mustang, a long-range fighter, was critical in World War II. The P-47 Thunderbolt, a heavyweight fighter, was used extensively in the same war. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, the Warthog, is a close air support icon. The Messerschmitt Me-262 marked a leap forward in aviation technology. Each of these game changers were instrumental in their eras, and their legacies still resonate today. Beyond the game changers, there are those that have transcended their practical roles to become icons. The Concorde was not just an aircraft, it was a supersonic symbol of luxury and speed. The B-52 Stratofortress, a strategic bomber, is an icon of power and resilience. These magnificent machines and others like them have become much more than just aircrafts. They are enduring icons that encapsulate the audacious spirit, the relentless innovation, and the boundless ambition that define the world of aviation. For more amazing aerial footage, and to join us in this incredible journey, check out the DroneScapes YouTube channel.
If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like and subscribe. And as always, thank you for watching.